the program that is related to the Goal Leader project, of goal-oriented cognition. Giovanni Pizzulo is the coordinator of that project. That's why he has this aura of authority, you see, and we all listen to him. I'm just saying nice things, okay, it's not true, but... So that means that Giovanni will then sort of introduce a little bit what this whole program is about, the coming days and goal leaders, and then we move on to the talk by Etienne. Yeah? All right.
Yeah, so welcome everybody. And so now the second week of the school will be much more focused on goal-oriented behavior, goal-directed decision-making and these issues. So I would say that during the first week we have seen several demonstrations of systems that are mostly based on stimulus response control systems and so in behaviors. So we have seen that simple organisms are really very much dependent. So the behavior of simple system is very much dependent on the environment. So the stimulus are coming and they are reacting to the stimulus, the stimuli. Whereas goal-directed behavior is slightly different. So the brain of most organisms, the brain of most animals, including most prominently humans, is not only able to react to environmental stimuli, but it's very much guided by internally formulated, internally generated goals. So there could be very simple and immediate goals, such as grasping something, or more distal goals, such as getting a PhD. And so a very important issue is how these goal systems that can be complex, can be hierarchical, how these goal systems take control over behavior. And in some cases, they are also able to overrule let's say, the most immediate stimuli. So let's imagine, for example, there is a sunny day in Barcelona, which was the case last week. But, so of course the sun really attracts you towards the beach. That could be a reactive behavior or just going to the beach. At the same time, you know you have to write your PhD, so you have this internal goal that really can take control over your behavior and really stop you from these distractions of the sunny beach. So in a sense, goal-directed control is all about this. And I think that this week we will see many examples of goal-directed decision-making from experimental perspective, from robotic perspective. And so I'm very happy to introduce Professor Koechlin. I hope I said it correctly, I did, I think. And, in a sense, he is an authority in the study of goal-directed systems and hierarchical goal-directed systems in especially human prefrontal cortex. And we will see from his talk that this goal system can be quite sophisticated, that you can have goals formulated at multiple levels, forming a hierarchy of control. And one nice thing about his work is that he's really trying to put together experimental and computational work in a very detailed way. So his laboratory has been formulating very detailed computational models of goal-directed control, of goal-directed decision-making, and trying hard to test them using fMRI human data, especially also other means. And so I'm very happy to have you here. We look forward to hearing this interesting thing.
Thank you for your introduction. Good morning. So, it should work? Yes. So I'm happy to be here. And so I'm going to talk about, of course, control, learning, and exploration in human decision making, which means that basically I'm going to talk about the prefrontal function and the human prefrontal functions. So my talk is divided in two parts, I would say. I will first focus more on some basics about prefrontal functions and the organization, the functional organization of the prefrontal cortex. Does it work, this? Can you hear me?
It's more for the recording.
Okay. And can you, okay. And the second part will be more about some computational model of this prefrontal function and about how to test this model too. So as just was said before, I mean the prefrontal executive function is involved as soon as action has no more automatic response to stimuli. So when this link, this direct link is broken in some way. And of course, it means that the stimulus is ambiguous. So it may trigger several actions. And in terms of information theory, simply means that the information conveyed by the stimulus is not all the information required to make the selections. So the idea is that the prefrontal cortex is basically computing this amount of information, so the remaining entropy given the stimulus about action. And this is what we observe in very simple experiment. For example, here we presented subject series of stimuli, and subjects have just to make a left or a right response according to some rules. So the stimulus, each stimulus provides some information about which action to make, left or right. But at the same time, this could also, there are some ambiguity remaining, and you can manipulate this quantity with instruction cues that we provide to subjects. I'm not going into details. And what we found is typically in this kind of experiment is that in the prefrontal cortex here, bilaterally, you see that actually the activations that you can measure with fMRI increase this amount of information, the entropy remaining after stimulus information has been removed. So you see this, and in the premotor cortex, you can see that now you have the information conveyed by the stimuli that participate to the premotor activations, along with the activations that depend about this quantity, which means that the premotor cortex basically integrate all the informations to make the choice, to select the action, sorry. Okay? So now, of course, this is a very big picture. And of course, what we want to know is how the prefrontal cortex resolves such ambiguities and makes a choice. So if we think about the problem, I mean, there are three types of information that the brain or that the prefrontal cortex can use to resolve these ambiguities. First, it can use some cues in the immediate context of actions to know which action to select when the stimulus is not informative enough. So, for example, if you hear a phone ringing, so your phone ringing, you don't know whether you have to respond or not, but if you are here, you know that during a conference, during a talk, usually you don't respond to phone. So this is the immediate context. There are some cues, and you don't respond. But if you are at home, you know that you can respond, and there are some, so you respond. So this is the immediate context you can use to resolve such ambiguities. Other kind of information you can use is episodic events. So, for example, if during this talk I tell you, okay, if your phone rings, please, you can respond. I provide some instruction at some times, and you can use later this instruction to possibly respond to your phone when it rings. So your brain can use this kind of events, episodic events, to basically resolve some ambiguities later in response to, for responding to stimuli. And finally, of course, you have also expected rewards. So a stimulus could be ambiguous. You have two possible actions, but one is actually more, you expect more reward from one compared to the other. And it means that basically you may choose this one. Okay, just focus on these cues.
So these three factors that PFC should take on board are an exclusive set view. This is it. There's nothing else.
You mean apart from this?
Mm-hmm. God or something, or
God.
Uh-huh.
God is a bit everywhere.
Okay. No, but this is it. This is the exclusive set.
I mean, it's a general picture. So I think you can more or less more or less categorize the type of information that is used in the prefrontal cortex in these different types. So basically, you have the stimulus, but then you have additional information. Immediate information that is temporally occur at the same time as the stimulus. You have past information, and you have expected information or reward, if you want. Okay? So if we focus on these two ones, of course, we can say that this entropy can be decomposed about the information conveyed by this and the information conveyed by episodic cues. And you can do also very simple experiment, at least in principle, where subjects have to respond to left, right to stimuli, and then now the information required to respond is carried by the stimulus, but also you need to take into account the immediate context, so here's the color of this card, and then also possibly some contextual cue. So you can make some experiment where you manipulate these different variables more or less orthogonal, in an orthogonal way. And you find this type of activation that you see here. You have still the premotor cortex, which responds to stimulus information. And now you see that just more anteriorly, you have regions that respond to the information conveyed by the context, the immediate context. Whereas in more anterior region, you have still the region that responds to the information conveyed by past events, what I call episodic events. And again, you see that this region seems to integrate both activations, that is, both type of information. So this anterior region reacts only to the information conveyed by instruction cues, episodic events, whereas this one seems to combine, to add both type of information, the episodic informations and the contextual information. And the premotor cortex do the same with information conveyed by the stimulus.
Sorry?
Yes?
So when you say it adds, do you just assume that activity is directly same as information, or how do you quantify information from the fMRI image?
So basically here what we do is that we simply correlate with the general idea is that the fMRI signal reflects the implication of a region in a process. And the general idea is that this implication is, of course, related to the amount of information that need to be processed. Okay. The fact that it's additive is probably means that the two information are processed here. It doesn't tell you exactly what kind of process is implemented in this region. But it gives you a general idea that contextual information is really processed or add up in the process of accumulating information to make the choice in this middle posterior prefrontal region, sorry. So Brodmann 44, 45, and not in more anterior regions. Okay? You can go a bit further with fMRI and you can show that actually episodic information is conveyed from these anterior regions to these posterior regions, whereas contextual information is conveyed from posterior to premotor region. So we can compute information flows using correlation analysis to see that actually the interaction between the regions are consistent with the cascade of informations that is go down up to the premotor cortex here. Okay, so posterior prefrontal region include contextual information to help the premotor cortex to make the selection, whereas more anterior prefrontal region use or process episodic information and provide this information to more posterior regions to possibly resolve the ambiguity. So the important thing is that this region, this is like layers that are add up every time there is not enough information in lower layer to solve the selection problem. So about the the last type of information is expected rewards. And of course, expected reward means that it's based on expectation, so some internal or subjective representation about what could happen. So consider, for example, this protocol where we presented letters to subjects, and some letters were in pink, other letters were in blue. And when the letter is pink, subjects are instructed to perform one task. Let us say to say whether this letter is a vowel or a consonant. But if the letter is blue, then the instruction is to perform another task, task 2, which is, for example, whether the letter is a lowercase or an uppercase letter. So this is so the color here, and this is actually the kind of experiment we use in the kind of protocol we use in previous experiment I just described you, that the color here is the contextual information that helps subject to choose the task to respond to the stimulus, which is the color. So this is what basically we studied previously in previous experiment I just showed you. So now, of course, you can have letters that appear with no color. That is, it's ambiguous situation, and subject need to choose a task. And in this experiment, what we do is that the two tasks lead to different rewards. So task 2 is more rewarding. So when subject do this task, after correctly performing this task, he gets a reward, which is on average, it's a stochastic reward, which is on average larger than the one he would get if he choose task 1. So it means that basically what we expect that in this kind of trial, subjects are going to choose task 2 because it's more rewarding. So typically in this kind of experiment, what we do is that after a while, we reverse the contingency. So after a series of trials, unpredictable for the subjects, the task 1 becomes a more rewarding task, and task 2 becomes a less rewarding task, okay? In order to add some contingency in the task. You saw that the problem is not so easy, actually, because it might be easy to make this selection, but here, for example, with pink, subjects are instructed to perform the lower rewarding task. So they will get less reward than with the other task. So we instructed subject to do this task. But if there was no instruction, subject would have preferred to choose the other task. So there are some conflict between what subject would do personally and what it is instructed to do. And of course, here in this experiment, if subject do not follow the instruction, subject were in some way punished. It means that if he performs the other task, he will not get any rewards in order that he follows the instruction. And of course, it's interesting for the subject in terms of reward to follow the instructions, but it's conflict with what it would have preferred personally. So what we know is that, what we found in this experiment, that it's a classical result, that in the medial part of the prefrontal cortex, and especially in this anterior part here, you have regions that respond to the outcome value, that code the outcome value, the feedback value. So if you get 5 or 2 euros, you get more or less activations. Also, what we found that, of course, here you have the behavioral performance. So after a reversal, when we reverse the contingency between the two tasks, you see here that subject, after this reversal, you see that subjects start to choose the best rewarding task in rule-free trial when there is no color, more and more often. And whereas in a rule-based trial, when we instructed subject with the pink and the blue color, subject, of course, don't choose a more rewarding task more often than chance, because he's instructed to do both, regardless of which one is the best rewarded.
So this is whole brain analysis or region of interest analysis?
So this is a whole brain analysis. Here that basically show you the region that are more activated in this kind of rule-free and rule-based choice compared to a baseline condition where simply subject repeat the same task, either task 1 or task 2. And here you show, for example, the purple region here. It's a region that basically is activated in rule-free compared to repeat trial, but where there is no activation in rule-based trial. So it's a region quite specific to process subjective values, subjective preference to make this rule-free choice, instruction-free choice. And you see that also that the red region are those that are activated more in rule-free than rule-based trials, but still remain activated in both. So what shows this graph is basically now you can start to see some, because there are some values involved, some medial prefrontal activations in choice, which means that these medial prefrontal activations are related to process the expected reward, the values, in order to guide the choice. Whereas I had shown you previously, there was no value involved. This was pure instructive task. We get only lateral prefrontal activations. So basically, you have something like that. We know with many studies, this is just an example, that medial prefrontal regions are representing encoding values involving choice, that drive choice, whereas lateral prefrontal regions are represented rules that guide choice. So we have the value space and the rule space in the medial and lateral prefrontal regions. And I explain you in the task, there might be some conflict between subjective values, the task you want to do, you would prefer to do, and the task you need to do. So exactly as the example, you go to the beach, or you have the rule that today this is the first session of this week, of this summer school, and you need to go there.
But Etienne, did you see it also so cleanly distinguished in your case? Because I had the impression that it was not really following these two orientations. Like your data, does it also follow that cleanly, this value rule space distinction?
Yes. The only thing we can do is that here, in the medial part, there are some additional regions that are specific to values. And whereas in the lateral region, there are specific regions to rules. But you're right, it's exactly why I show you like this. This is, the activation reflects an interaction between the rule space and the value space to finally make the decision, make the selection. And there might be two possible ways of integrating value and preferences in the brain. So one is what I call, this is a consequentialist or utilitarian integration. So here you have the medial prefrontal cortex that encodes values or preferences, whatever you want. And the idea is in this view is that the selection occurs in the value space. So when there is no rule, it's simple. You have the subjective values and the selection and the chosen option, which is possibly sent to lateral regions, to other brain regions, including lateral prefrontal regions. And now when you have rules, in this view, in this utilitarian view, the rule informations in transfer to medial prefrontal regions in the value space to influence or to modulate values. But the choice remains driven by value, by subjective value. So for example, in this morning, you want to go to the beach because it's sunny, but you know that you have to be at this time here in this room. So the rule, the instruction to be here at this time is going to influence your preference. And if you are here on time, it means that at the end, finally, ultimately, you prefer to be here because of the rule. So this is the utilitarian integration. So the choice remains guided by the selection is made in the preference space, possibly modulated by some rule information.
But wait, Etienne, if everything is connected to everything, how does it really explain something, right? Because in some sense you're saying, look, both are modulated by the other, but it might also imply that this whole distinction, this very clean distinction between mediolateral or value and rule, is maybe not so clean.
Right. Let me go forward before to respond to you.
Okay, good.
Then you have the other possibility, is that the selections occur, this is a normative view, the selection occur in the rule space. So no rules, in the situation when there is no rules, the preferences are compute here in medial prefrontal regions, and then they are sent or conveyed to the lateral prefrontal region to influence the choice here in the rule space. So if there is no rule, of course, at the end, the choice will be driven by these preferences. Now, when you have rule, the preferences are still conveyed to the lateral prefrontal region, but the rule is going to override these preferences and to say, okay, this is the rule, this is your preferences, but the rule is stronger and drive your choice. And possibly the chosen options is sent to the medial prefrontal region in order to update preferences according to action outcome. So the difference between models is subtle. The main difference is that the selection occurs either in the rule space or in the preference space. That is, in terms of neuroscience, in lateral prefrontal region or in medial prefrontal regions. So just to go very fast on this, of course, to study this kind of model, we need, a functional model, you need to have some estimation of subjective value. And the general idea is that the choice, subject choice are driven by this kind of, by the relative values of each task according to a logistic function. And values are updated according to the feedback subject received in every trial, using here, for example, a kind of reinforcement, using here reinforcement learning, that is, the actual reward received by subject is compared to what subject expected to have, and is this prediction error used to update the internal value encoded in this medial prefrontal region. Not going into detail about this kind of model. It will be probably, I will do that later. And of course, what we found is that in medial prefrontal region, you see that in rule-free trial, activation vary with the relative value of the chosen task. And it's true actually everywhere, which really means that this region interact all the time. And then we can use this measure of relative value, subjective relative value, to know what is the main difference between the two models is that here in this normative volume, the medial regions convey subjective preferences to lateral region in the normative model, whereas in the utilitarian model, what is conveyed, this is rule information. So if we compute the correlations between medial and lateral prefrontal region, according to this view, these correlations should be independent of values, of subjective values. Whereas in the normative model, because what is transferred is subjective value, the correlation between the two regions, the correlation between activation between the two regions should vary as subjective values. In rule-based choice, the choice is based on the rule, which means that, as I show you in the experiment, which means that basically they are not related to preferences, which means that the correlations between these two regions should vary as not as the subjective of the relative value of the chosen option, because it's independent of value, the choice, but should vary as the absolute difference between the two values, regardless of the choice, because the choice is driven by the rule. And this is actually exactly what we observe. You observe here that if we compute this correlation between the two regions, we observe that in rule-based choice, the correlation between the two regions vary as the absolute values, the absolute difference between the two tasks, regardless of the choice. You see, this is this U-shaped function. That is that these two regions communicate and convey between these two regions. There are some values which are transferred, relative values, but independent of the choice.
So how can I see that this transfer happens directly between these areas? I mean, you could... Or
through other regions, this is what you mean?
Yes, for instance.
We don't know, of course, yeah, from this analysis.
Because at best we can say they co-vary in some way.
It's true.
Is it reasonable?
What we know that this medial and lateral region are very strongly connected. They are actually very close. I don't know whether I don't have a clear cornell picture, but it's true. It could be conveyed through other regions.
And now also the magnitude of this effect. How should we interpret that?
The what?
The magnitude of the effect, right? You go from minus 1.5 to 0.5. How would this translate to, let's say, fractions of neural activity, for instance, or like to an interpretable quantity?
I think you can only interpret relative values. I mean, variations.
Sure. Okay.
I don't think you can go...
And can you say something about the latencies of these interactions? Because we are basing this on fMRI, which, as we know, is relatively...
No, we don't know the latency. What we can do is that we can do more sophisticated techniques, like dynamic causal modeling, where we can study independently the influence of medial regions to lateral regions, and conversely the influence of lateral region to medial regions independently. So this is a different technique which is called dynamic causal modeling, where this technique is based on computing. Basically, it assumes that the two regions form a dynamical system, and it assumes some lags in the system, and then it tries to find the best dynamical system, how interaction variables are modulated by some parameters, which explain brain activation we observe with fMRI. And so we did this analysis in this experiment.
Sorry, I have a more theoretical question in a sense. So in the normative view, you assume that what is passed from the medial areas to lateral areas are preferences, whereas I think that your data are also compatible with the idea that what is passed is not a preference, but just a reward expectation. So in a sense, it's like, I'm just saying, okay, if I follow this rule, I will have this reward. And that's just an expectation, it's not my preference in a sense.
Reward expectation vary as a relative value of the task. I mean,
Yes.
so I'm not sure I get your point
so
actually.
The point is that in the utilitarian view, you call it preference because this preference is directly mapped to a choice. So whereas you can also assume that you just expect a reward. You are not choosing the highest reward. You are just expecting that reward. So I know that if I respond, let's say this is uppercase, I will get $4. That's just my expectation.
And what about the rule?
No. Well, the rule system just is like is generating, is asking to the medial area to generate a prediction of what reward it will take, and this prediction can be used for two purposes basically. One purpose is for choice, and the other purpose for checking if the expectation was correct, such as for training the model.
Yeah, but this is the same for the rule. The rule can, you can draw some reward prediction using the rule. If I follow the rule, I will get some rewards.
Yeah, but
If I break the rule or I don't follow the rule, I will not get some reward. Maybe I will be punished. So
no, I completely agree. So the way I was thinking this system is that the rule does not formulate the reward prediction. It asks the medial areas to formulate it and gets back this reward expectation. So I think this is another compatible view. But
so in the normative view, the rule doesn't influence subjective preferences. It's a rule, if you want, that don't influence the way you will attribute value to the different options. This is what you mean?
no, well, maybe we can also discuss this offline.
Okay. In the utilitarian view, this is the converse. The rule is, if you want, transformed into values, and at the end you choose what you prefer. These data are consistent with the more normative view and not the utilitarian view. That is, here you see that the SEC using this technique convey subjective preferences, that is the absolute difference between the value of the two tasks, to lateral regions, and it's true in both hemispheres actually. And in rule-free trial, you see that conversely, the lateral region convey now the value of the chosen option to the SEC, to medial region. That is that this region receive absolute values and return a sign value according to the choice, which means that basically the selection based on value is occur here in lateral prefrontal regions, that is in the rule space. In rule-based trial, you see that, again, this is the same. There is no difference. This region conveys subjective values. There is no difference between this slope in rule-free and rule-based trial. But now the lateral region return evidence of choice, but unrelated to values, which means that the choice is, of course, driven by the queue, instruction queue, but overriding the subjective preferences. Is no more influences by any subjective preferences, even the preferences, even the value of choosing the rule, if you want. Okay?
But no question. I mean, so this follows up what Giovanni was saying. And what you're seeing is an echo of neural activity that is playing out at orders of magnitudes more rapidly than what you measure. So that means as soon as a cue hits any of these areas, this interaction will start, right? So whatever you observe will be a mixture of already dense interactions between these areas. So is it unreasonable to discretize, if you want, the processing so strongly and say, well, this exclusively happens here and then it goes there? is that really reasonable if you look at the anatomical and physiological reality of it?
We can test the model you said. This is the model where actually the two regions, there is quite homogeneity in the two regions. That the two regions, I mean, always interact, and basically you should not see some differences between the two. And this model explains better the data.
Yeah, but the data is obtained at these very long time scales, where maybe what you're looking at is more an effect of memory, memory consolidation, further post hoc processing, whatever, but not the real-time decision making. Because what you see actually becomes a significant signal when a decision already has been made.
What you see is all the processing that start at the time the stimulus is presented, at stimulus onset.
Yeah, we talk about a range of dozens of milliseconds that this is playing out, right? And you're measuring at the level of seconds.
If you want, if you have to, you see a stable, a kind of stable state if you want, but the idea is that in this direction, what is conveyed is more some information about what will be selected at the end, a part, and what is sent here is what is the internal value for the subjects.
Well, you cannot really send what is sent here or there. All you see is the covariation. Okay. But look, I would not
for sure.
Let's not derail the talk.
I agree with that. I mean, but if we try to infer something about this,
sure. No, given the data you have, this is the most reasonable interpretation.
Exactly.
I have no problem with that.
But I agree there are some reservation about all this kind of analysis. Okay, perfectly. Okay, let's. So this is basically what we found here, that you have processing of preferences here. They are conveyed to the rule space where actually the selection occurs. So it's an important theoretical difference, whether, at least for neuroscientists, whether the selection occurs in medial prefrontal region or in lateral prefrontal region. Here you have evidence that actually the final selection that commit the organism into some action is occur in the lateral prefrontal regions. Okay, I'm going to skip that. I would like to, before to go to some computational models, just to, what time is it? Yeah. Just to say a few words about these very anterior prefrontal regions, which according to this model is at the top of the hierarchy. And this is a very interesting region because it's not, this region has not real equivalent in non-human primates in the lateral part. We know that this is a region that is involved in learning by trial and errors, in analogical and relational reasoning, in mental calculus, especially when you have some subcalculus, in multitasking, and it was also recently related to some measure of fluid intelligence. So we propose, I mean, now some time ago, that this region actually is specifically involved in holding on and representing alternative course of action, alternative task. While you are performing one task, then this region possibly can represent and monitor alternative task. So basically, for example, I am giving my talk, then I am interrupted by a question, so I put my talk in a pending state to respond to the question, and then when I responded, then I restart my talk at the point I just stop it. Okay, so this is a general idea. I'm not going too long into detail too much about this. It could be quite easily tested in some tasks. For example, here you have a task. Subjects are presented series of stimuli, and they have to perform a task. So for example, here I think saying whether two successive letters are also successive in the word tablet. And at some, in some trials, there were some lowercase letters which were presented, and subjects were simply instructed that in this case, they have to suspend the capital task and to make another task on lower case letter. Okay, and there are some many controls. And you can observe that in this kind of task, I mean, you have very entire prefrontal activations in this branching condition when you branch between the main task and the subtask and compared to other conditions. And this is the only brain region that shows this pattern. And it's not a problem of complexity of the task. There are many controls. It's a very, very robust finding that actually as soon as one task is put in a pending state and you perform another task, these very entire prefrontal regions are activated. Okay, so let's switch to this. I'm sorry, I'm going a bit fast, but you can ask questions, it's not a problem. So now I just described you some general principle of the prefrontal architecture, quite a broad view, with this hierarchy of processing that allow to involve more and more distant informations in the selection process to select the action. I show you some evidence that the medial prefrontal regions are involved in processing subjective values, outcomes, and these values are conveyed to this lateral system to influence the choice, of course, which is very important. And now we'd like to address one issue is how actually all these representations are learned by the prefrontal system. Let us put this in this way. The prefrontal cortex basically manipulates strategies, or what we call also task set. That is some unitary entity which includes some internal models that map stimuli onto actions and that map also stimuli actions pairs onto expected outcomes. And possibly you have some contextual cue or episodic cues that allow you to select these strategies or the expected outcome to select this strategy in a given situation. So this is basically the core function of the prefrontal executive function. Which strategy is valuable, is appropriate in a given situation. The problem is that, and one of the core difficulties that face this executive function, that in everyday life, I mean, the world is uncertain, so you have some stochasticity, of course. It's changing, there are some variability, but especially the main problem is that it's open-ended. That is, you may face situations that you never encountered before. So you have no strategy for that, basically. So basically, it means that we continuously, or the prefrontal function continuously arbitrate between three main behaviors, either deciding to stay with the current strategy and possibly adjusting it to some variability, or deciding to switch to another strategy that is learned, that is stored in your long-term memory, or possibly creating new strategy. So we were interested by this question. So how actually the prefrontal executive function arbitrate between these three main options. And it's a very complex problem, actually, in the sense that, let us say that you are doing something, you use a given strategy, whatever, and you get a negative feedback, very negative feedback. So there are different ways to interpret it. Either you get this negative feedback because your strategy was not so good. So you need to adjust it, so to learn it or to learn it. Or you use a very good strategy, but actually the environment has changed, the situation has changed. And it's not your strategy that need to be adjusted, but you need to switch to another strategy. So how the brain recognizes this, makes the difference between these two options, these two situations. And of course, if the situation has changed, you may face a situation where that was previously seen, encountered, which means that basically you should have in your memory a strategy that corresponds to this situation, but maybe you never encountered it. But how do you know that you never encounter it if you don't process all your long-term memory? So this, you see that this is a very complex problem. And actually this problem becomes rapidly, there are some statistical methods to handle this problem in a theoretical way, which are known as, you probably know this much better than me, which are known as all these based on Dirichlet processes, mixture of Dirichlet processes. But this process become very intractable. This computation become totally intractable in even quite simple situation, which means that the brain, and more specifically the prefrontal cortex, implement probably some approximative algorithm that perform well enough, probably a bit similar to this kind of statistical processes. And we were interested to find this algorithm, which are really this prefrontal algorithm, which of course need to be tractable because they need to be implemented materially in the brain. So we basically, just to make things concrete, you use this protocol, again, very simple protocol. Subject represented digits, and they have to make a response to choose one among 4 response buttons, and they get a feedback here, a positive feedback with a nice tone, or negative feedback, bad tone. And that's it. And subject could learn gradually which was the correct response to each stimulus. And what is the correct response? Is basically that for every stimulus, there was one response which gave a feedback with 90%, and other response simply provide a negative feedback in 90% with 90% probability.
But it's so far an association learning task, but you learn to associate an action with a cue.
With a stimulus.
Yeah. So
Yeah, very simple.
okay, but we don't necessarily have rules or anything like that yet. Okay.
No. Very basic. Mm-hmm. You learn by trial and error, basically, but there are just some noise in the feedback.
Sure.
Then we complexify a little bit the task. After a while, we change the contingency. That is, the mapping between stimulus and action change. Of course, subject cannot predict that. And what happens that basically subject need to relearn something, to relearn the mapping. And then another complexification is that in one session, every time there was a new episode with a new mapping, actually the mapping were not randomly drawn, but they were drawn from a set of 3 different mapping, A, B, C. And basically, every time there was a new episode, it could be either mapping A, B, C. So that subject, there was some recurrency, and subject re-encounter what they previously learned. And there was another session where now in every episode, every time there was a switch in contingency, this was a totally new mapping that subject never encountered before. Okay? And subjects were not told, of course, whether they were performing in this session or not. So in this session, for example, when they switch from this episode to this one, no, sorry, from this one to this one, they need to understand that if they want to perform very efficiently, that actually in this episode, this is the same mapping as this one. And not a totally new mapping that they need to learn. So here, this is subject behavior. So here, this is the number of trials start from episode onset, so when the mapping changed. And here we represented the proportion of correct response from episode onset. So of course, you see that subject, right after the episode onset, correct response this percentage is very low because they use the previous mapping they learned, but then they gradually improve and learn the new mapping. And you can see that they learn it much faster, relatively faster in the recurrent condition compared to the open condition. That is that even if in between they learned some incongruent associations, they were able to process or to recognize the fact that the same mapping reoccur and they reuse, or the brain could reuse some previously learned association. Here, this is the proportion of exploratory response. That is a response that was not correct in the episode, but that was also not correct in the preceding episode. So this response were not perseverative. So you see that after an episode onset, the proportion of exploratory response increased very fast and then shrink gradually during the episode. And again, they shrink faster in the recurrent compared to the open condition. And finally, here you have an important measure. Here we measure how dependent is the response, a subject response, to the feedbacks that were presented in the previous trial. So in every trial, how dependent is the response to the information conveyed by the feedback just in the previous trial. So this is a mutual information between feedback and response. So you see that in the open condition, this measure is not null, which means that, of course, when the same stimulus is repeated in 2 successive trials, if you get a positive feedback to this stimulus, it will mean that you perform the correct action. And of course, in the next trial where the same stimulus is repeated, you will gain information from this feedback to repeat the same action. So that's why in the open condition, it's remained flat and at a more or less flat and at a non-null, no zero value.
These differences are statistically significant in A and B between?
Yeah. Everything is highly significant. Yeah. This is standard errors, here you can see. And here, what happened is you have a peak in the recurrent condition. That is that in this condition, there are some transfer of information from the feedback in a given trial to the response in the next trial. In addition to this effect of stimulus repetition, that is, even if not, this means that even if the same stimulus is not repeated from one trial to another, subjects were able to use feedback information about the first stimulus to know what should be the right response to the next stimulus, which means that basically subjects are able to retrieve some mappings. They have some representation of full mapping. I got a positive response to this stimulus, which means that this is this mapping which is correct or which is appropriate now. And from this mapping, I know that the response to this another stimulus should be this response. So this is what actually, this measure tells you that this is what happened in the...
But that happens until about with a depth of 10 trials, about. Or I don't understand it otherwise. Do I misread this?
Yeah, because this is mutual information. So after a while, when subjects select the mapping and they know the mapping, then the dependence between two successive responses become more or less zero, let us say, or very weak, because now every response depends only about of the queue.
Yeah, but why does it vary with the number of trials in the episode? That is reflecting your protocol, or is it reflecting the memory of the subject, or both?
You mean the fact that it's occur at 10?
Yeah, that it sort of it merges with the open condition. So whatever this memory effect is, seems to occur up to about 9 trials in the episode.
I will respond to you later with some additional
I have a long list now. I should start making notes. Okay.
You will see. So here, this is a subject performance I just showed you, and here this is the optimal theoretical performance. When you use statistical learning methods, based of course on theoretical process, this is the performance you get. So you cannot do better than this. So you see that there are some, of course, similarities between human performance and the optimal theoretical performance. But you see, of course, that this optimal performance is much outperformed totally subject's behavior. But still, you have this same kind of behavior. So especially here, you see that the peak of this mutual information, I mean, you observe it, but then it decreases very fast. And here you see, for example, that trial 10, the model is at this level of performance, whereas subjects are still at 70% correct response.
But why are humans then superior to the optimal agent in some details of this task? Like, for instance, if you look at, and again, this mutual dependence measure, or also an exploratory measure, you see that with humans in the recurrent task hit about 0.4, and in your optimal agent hits about below 0.3. In the exploratory, the center panel.
Yeah.
No, the center panel, for instance. That was the one I described now. I took a random one. Right, you see the optimal agent shows lower performance in this exploratory task for the recurrent protocol as opposed to the humans. You see the difference? The difference is about 0.1.
Yeah, because there are some perseverative response. So you can make less exploratory response, but more perseverative response. I will try to explain this with the next slides. I agree that it's complex to understand exactly what's going on here. I mean, so what we know is that, so how to explain this human performance? We know that it cannot be it cannot reflect only some basic reinforcement learning process, because you probably know that very well. In reinforcement learning, you have a selective model, you learn the Q value, and then you use these values to select action. And of course, with this model, this is a reinforcement learning model prediction fit on the data, and you see that, of course, this model is not able to reflect the difference between the recurrent and the open condition, because there is no memory, no ability to retrieve previously learned association or previously learned task set strategy. But you see that actually the overall dynamics is well captured by simply reinforcement learning model. And of course, this reinforcement learning model cannot capture these differences here. There are some other models, important models that were proposed, especially for motor control. This is a model from Doya and Kawato. And in this model, they use reinforcement learning, but with different task set, different strategy, and this strategy compete to learn and to select the action. So this is here in this terminology. This is what we call second-order inferential process. So basically, in this model, there is a monitoring of the uncertainty of external contingency and the reliability of each strategy. And of course, this reliability is processed for each behavioral strategy. So this is this kind of model. You have different strategies that are monitored in parallel. You have an internal selective model that learns through reinforcement learning the contingencies. And in addition, you have a predictive model or a forward model that learn which outcome is expected according to the actions you perform in response to stimulus. And based on this predictive model and the actual outcome received, you can compute a measure of reliability for each strategy. And you choose a strategy in every trial which has the best reliability. So this is what we call multiple reinforcement learning, multiple model-based reinforcement learning mechanism. And the question is whether this could explain simply this behavior. And actually, it could not. Because when you fit this kind of model, you end up with the best fit is obtained only with a model that includes only two parallel strategies, and with an inability actually to account for the difference between the two conditions again. You improve, of course, the fitting, but you still cannot capture these qualitative differences. That is, this kind of model where you only try to manage a fixed number of strategies in your mind and to select the appropriate one is not enough to account for this behavior. The problem is that you have two totally different conditions. One is a recurrent condition where it's very useful to have only a few number of task sets to handle and to select. And the open condition where you basically need to understand in every condition is a new mapping. So this is two totally opposite demands. And this kind of model where you have a fixed number of task sets cannot handle it. Okay, so it's why we propose an additional model, which adds basically a third order of inference. That basically we assume that there is the model monitor the opportunity to create new strategy through an hypothesis testing scheme. So this model, this last model we propose, is basically an approximation of Dirichlet process model for creating strategy on demand that obey two computability constraints. One is that Bayesian inference on task set reliability operates online, only through forward processes. Because in Dirichlet process, when you start to create new strategy, it means that to be optimal, every time you get a new feedback, you need to revise your entire history of creation to know whether you were right or the model were right to create a strategy 10 trials ago and so on. So basically, you make in the Dirichlet process model, you make inference about the whole history of possible creation or no creation you do. That's why this model becomes intractable very rapidly. Here, we only assume that there is forward Bayesian inference with no backward process. It occurs online. You don't revise the history of what you created in the past, which is a quite reasonable assumption. And the second assumption is that only a small subset of strategies stored in long-term memory are monitored. So this is what we call the inferential buffer. And of course, this reflects the capacity limit of human working memory. Why this assumption? As soon as you consider a system that is able to create new strategy, and if you don't make this assumption here, it means that the system will create new strategy, new strategy, new strategy, and then infer more and more strategy to make some Bayesian inference on support which contain gradually a very large number of strategies. And of course, it's become biologically implausible that basically when you make some choice in your life, the system processes all the strategy you have in your long-term memory that you create, learn through your through the days, through the weeks, through your life, and so on. So the systems, probably the prefrontal system is done that only a small subset of strategy are monitored. But of course, it's raised the issue, how do you update this buffer? Which strategy are monitored and which one are not? And the idea is that a process hypothesis testing will enable to explore a new strategy built upon long-term memory for possibly updating the inferential buffer. So in this model, we combine some standard Bayesian inference with some hypothesis testing, which will explore the possibility to update which strategies are monitored with new strategies built from long-term memory. So basically now, you have, in your long-term memory, you have many strategies, and you have an inferential buffer that only process the reliability of these strategies. So how to combine Bayesian inference and hypothesis testing? It could be done by assuming that actually the system infers what we call the absolute reliability of each task set and not the relative reliability. In the previous model I show you, and most of models that are proposed, and also in direct process model, because you can review it all the time, what is processed is the relative reliability. Here we process the absolute reliability, which means that basically our able is a strategy, what is the ability of each strategy to predict action outcomes, irrespective of other strategy you are monitoring. Actually, this is not tractable. This is not, you cannot compute exactly this, this notion of absolute reliability, because as it's written here, it's require computing action outcome likelihood over all possible strategy, even those you never know, you don't know, you never encounter. But we can use an approximation for that. That is that the likelihood, the action outcome likelihood associated with all this unmonitored or unknown strategy could be globally estimated as deriving from random behavior. So what you don't know is as if you perform randomly if you want.
But that would not scale very well, right?
Scale?
If you have to base it on random behavior, you still have to sample all these options in some way. So if the set of action that you want to consider or strategies you want to consider is expanding, search time will go up.
No, because random here it's only prediction about outcomes. So basically, rather than to try to figure out what would be the prediction about outcome based on what you don't know, you simply say that I don't know this, and it means that outcome prediction are uniform for me. Mm-hmm. And so it means that you have like a dummy strategy, which is I perform randomly, and you monitor the reliability of this dummy.
It's like a prior that you assume, yeah. Okay, they all have a uniform outcome. Okay, got you.
And this is here the internal model of this dummy strategy, which is basically a uniform model. And you monitor the reliability of this dummy strategy as if it was a real strategy. And the approximation is that this reliability of this dummy strategy is an estimation of what would be the reliability of all unknown strategy. And of course, you also monitor the reliability of other strategy you monitor. So you have now an estimation of the absolute reliability of each task set, which means that basically it could happen that, because it's now an absolute notion, that the strategy I is more reliable than unreliable, which means that is more likely to succeed than fail to predict action outcomes. irrespective of their task. You can define this notion. So a task set is either reliable or not reliable. And of course, when a reliable task set exists, it is necessarily unique, and then it becomes, by assumption, the actor, that is, the strategy that is going to drive action. Because we introduce this notion of absolute reliability, you can introduce this notion of reliable strategy. One strategy could be described as being reliable, while others are unreliable. And of course, this is the reliable strategy that is going to drive behavior.
Yeah, a question on this. So if you have a task strategy and you assume that they're not a priori defined, it means it's something that you have ever tried in your history, right? So if you say, look, I have a strategy, but I don't know the outcome, actually means you have a set of action strategies that are defined a priori. Because otherwise, if it has been ever generated, then at the point that you generated it, there will be some consequence, with either no outcome or some outcome. You see the difference, or you see the problem?
No, I don't see your point.
Okay, the point is, you're saying, look, I have action strategies, but I don't know their outcome. So now you want to estimate their outcome. You say, well, if we just assume that they're all randomly defined and they all have a similar outcome probability, so it's not a problem anymore, right?
Oh, sure.
But I'm saying...
This is exactly what happens when the system will create a new strategy from long-term memory. He built a strategy, and of course, he don't know the outcome. And then he will progressively learn which outcome.
But if you've constructed for long-term memory, the ingredients of long-term memory have at some point in time been exposed to the outside world. So they have been in some way tied to an outcome. And from there you could estimate now the possible outcome of some constructed strategy.
Yes,
no,
I understand what you mean, but I don't understand the implication of what you want to say.
You're trying to solve a problem that's maybe not a problem. That you make a very strong assumption that your proposal only makes sense if you assume that you have a priori defined strategies for action that have never been exposed to any kind of feedback. And I'm saying that's a very strong and unreasonable assumption, because if it's in your long-term memory, it's stuff you have done. Right? It's stuff, and these are actions you have performed, or there are components of actions and behavior you have performed. As a result, you can estimate it. Let's think about a maze. I have points A, B, and C. Okay, now I find my reward, so now they're all linked to having an outcome. Okay, now I'm going to build a new sequence, B, D, and E. Well, the contribution of B in the sequence A, B, C to that outcome is giving me now an estimate of how strongly B might lead to a reward or an outcome in the conglomerate B, D, E, etc. Okay, so it's not the case that you have no information on outcome. That's what I'm claiming.
Yeah, but at the very beginning, you even don't know that you have B, D, E in your maze. You know nothing if you are confronted to a new situation. You can even imagine.
But then you negate your own fundamental assumption, which is to construct a strategy for long-term memory, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm just saying is, all of this is fine if you make that strong assumption that you have ingredients for action strategies in long-term memory that actually have never been performed.
I'm not sure. We can discuss that later.
Well, it's genes or it's the world. These are the two things that provide information a priori in this case. But okay, we can discuss it over lunch.
Yeah. So here you have, for example, this reliable strategy is driving behavior. After a while, it could change, switch to another strategy, and so on. So here the model behaves in an exploitation state. You exploit the strategy you are monitoring. Again. But of course, in this model, and this is a nice feature, it could happen that actually there is no reliable strategy in the strategy you are monitoring. And this is what is the interesting point in this model. It means that in this case, the model will build a new strategy, start to monitor a new strategy, which we call the probe actor, that is going to use to drive behavior. And this new strategy is built from long-term memory as a weighted mixture. I have no time to describe how the weighted mixture is done, but basically this is simply a mixture of all strategy in long-term memory weighted by some, or it's a marginalization over all strategy in long-term memory given contextual cue. But I have no time to describe this. So basically, you create a new strategy from your long-term memory, and you initialize at a given, it's a free parameter in the model, at a given level of reliability. And you use it to drive your behavior. So it's a way to retrieve some strategy you already encounter, but it's also a way to remix strategies and to start to learn some new strategy.
Sorry, just a question. I think that this weighting mixture answers a little bit to Paul's question now, because so the prediction here is that if this strategy includes some subparts that you already experienced, probably with this mixed weighted mixer, you will reuse this thing. So I think it answers a little bit. No, what do you think?
So you had the answer without knowing it. That's good, no? That's long-term memory.
No, but that's only my interpretation.
This is actually a very important point in the model here, a very important component in the model, the way you remix strategy from long-term memory. And okay, but it's a long story. So you have a reliable, you create an actor, a probe, you use it for acting, this is the actor, and of course at the beginning he has no reason to be reliable, so you set it at a given value, which is unreliable. So now the system operates in a exploration state. Then two things could happen to quit exploration and return to exploitation. The first case is what I call rejection event. That is, while you are using your probe, one strategy in your monitoring buffer becomes reliable, while your probe still remains unreliable. Typically in this case, what happens is that you cancel your probe, so you discard it, you reject it, you disband it, whatever, and you return with this strategy. So it was just a try, but an unsuccessful try for a new strategy. So this is rejection event. And of course, it could happen, the converse, that because of learning, the probe becomes reliable while all others remain unreliable. And in that case, the probe is confirmed. It's a confirmation event. So you quit exploration because you confirm your probe, and it remains a regular strategy in your monitoring buffer. And of course, if your monitoring buffer has a limited capacity, let us say 3 here, you need to remove one strategy, to discard one strategy from your buffer. And this is what is shown here. This strategy is discarded from the buffer, but of course it's remains in long-term memory. So you are no more monitoring this strategy. So the buffer is a small window on long-term memory. And from long-term memory, when there is no reliable strategy in your buffer, you create, through this mixture, a new strategy that you test. Either it will become reliable while your monitor strategy remains unreliable, and you keep it. If you reach the capacity limit, you discard one strategy. Or this probe strategy remain unreliable while another monitor strategy become reliable, and then you select it and you reject the probe. Just timing is a bit short. And what is important here just is that with this model, the mixture of behavior strategy from long-term memory approximates the optimal mixture derived from direct reprocess. I will just try to explain you.
Sorry, can you just explain a bit more? You say it's a weighted mixture of strategies. How exactly are the weights chosen? So how are the new strategies created?
Okay. Yes. I have, I think, one slide here. Actually, every strategy includes an additional model, which is a contextual model, that tries to associate any contextual cue to a given strategy. And this contextual model is learn actually how a contextual cue will predict the reliability of this strategy So this contextual model basically learns to associate cues and reliabilities. And when a strategy is discarded from the monitoring buffer, of course, this internal model remains in long-term memory. So this model is used then to make the mixture, the weight mixture when you create a new strategy. So basically, you marginalize over all strategy over your long-term memory, or you mix it, or you make an average if you want, weighted by this internal model, weighted by what you learn, how reliable was this strategy in this given context. And so this is the first effect. The second effect, which is implicit in the model, is that imagine that you face a recurrent situation, times 2 times, which means that when you face this situation, the corresponding strategy is not necessary in your monitoring buffer, which means that you are going to create, from your long-term memory, a new strategy. And if you can recognize the context, it will be influences. You will be able to retrieve this strategy from long-term memory because you already learned it. But you still create a new strategy. It means that actually you create in your long-term memory a new frames corresponding to this recurrent strategy. So when a strategy is very recurrent, it means that you create many, many frames in your long-term memory corresponding to this strategy. And then when you make the mixture of strategy to create a new strategy, the mixture will be highly influenced by this effect of frequency. So there is, by mixing this effect of contextual models and the effect of frequency due to just what I explained to you, then the weighted mixture to create new strategy approximate an optimal statistical process that use a direct process. Okay, so I don't know when I should stop, but I have some interesting stuff to show you.
We still have about 20 minutes till lunch.
Okay.
So
I have 20 minutes more. This is what you mean. Okay. So here this is...
with the questions and so on, right?
Yeah. So I will try to be very fast. Here, just to show you that basically this model accounts now for the behavioral performance in these 2 conditions. If you fit this model, and so qualitatively, you can see here that it explains the difference between the 2. And you see that quantitatively, whatever the fitting criteria, you fit much better the human performance than the other model. So what is interesting is that in the experiment I show you, the capacity of the buffer can be a free parameter. So we can check what is the best capacity that explain human behavior. And what we found that if we fit the model in the recurrent condition, we found 3 as the best fitting capacity limit of the inferential buffer, which is expected because there are 3 recurrent type of episode mapping. But what is interesting is that even in the open condition, if we fit the model in the open condition, there is a new strategy in every condition. The best fitting model is still has a capacity of still 3 monitoring strategy, which means that this value of 3 is not magical, of course, but it's not at least an artifact of the protocol. It seems that it means that humans are monitoring no more than 3-4 strategies at the same time. We can check it. We did. We tested subjects with protocol including 4 recurrent strategy, and we noticed that for this subject they didn't perform better than in the open conditions. This is what you can see here in gray, even worse.
But in this case, the strategy is still defined around this immediate Q action pairs.
Yes.
Right? So 3 or 4 strategies means 3 or 4 action pairs. Strategy, because a strategy might vary in its depth, right, and how many elements are tied together.
Of course. Yeah. Here this shows another experiment, exactly the same protocol, but with different parameters in terms of timing and so on, 40 subjects. And this is the experiment we use because we put subject in the scanner in this experiment. And you see again that here now the onset is here, and you see again that subject correct response, exploratory response in the recurrent and open episode. And again, this peak at the very beginning, and you see that the monad will explain this behavior. Okay, so now just everything seems to be quite smooth here. Okay, but this is not how the model behaves, because the model basically at some point will consider that the mapping is using, or the strategy is using, is no more appropriate and is going to switch in exploration. And actually what the model indicates you that this kind of gradual increase are just spurious artifacts from averaging across episodes and across subjects. And this is what is shown here. Here this is the model behavior with parameter fitted on subject behavior. And here we relying subject behavior on switching event. When the algorithm tells that it creates a probe actor. And you see that the model predicts that at that time the proportion of exploratory response increase very sharply and reach a plateau and then decrease slowly. And the same for perseverative response. When before switching between exploration, the model performs with perseverative response, and then suddenly this drop off to a very low value during the exploration period, during when the model uses the probe. Because of course the probe is at the very beginning is more or less random. You see that this switching event, on average, occur about 3-4 trials after episode onset. Here, this line show you the episode onset. Then this is the exploration period, and then we can also rely the subject model behavior on confirmation or rejection event. When the model quit explorations, and return to exploitation either by confirming or rejecting the probe. So the model predicts that when it rejects the probe to return to a strategy he monitors, you see that there is a sharp increase an abrupt increase of correct response because he found basically that he had in the buffer the right strategy. So an abrupt increase of correct response, an abrupt decrease of exploratory response, whereas, of course, in confirmation event, the model simply confirms the probe and keep it, and of course, the behavior remains smooth increasing performance is gradual. Now we can rely on subject performance on this algorithmic event predicted by the model. So we can rely on human performance on switching events. We can rely on subject performance on rejection events when the model predicts a rejection and on confirmation event. And this is what is shown here. So this is the data here. And what you can see is that actually humans perform quite precisely as predicted by the model. So when the model predicts that it switch in exploration, you have this increase, this abrupt increase of exploratory response and this abrupt decrease of preservative response. It's less abrupt than in the model because there are, of course, some noise. The model is not able to capture exactly when subjects switch. For some subjects, there are some noise in the data. And you see that it's the same when the subject quit exploration in the way predicted by the model, either by confirming the probe or, by confirming the probe or by rejecting the probe, exactly as more or less predicted by the model.
But how accurate is the prediction? Can you say something about this? So what's the error, what's the residual error in your prediction?
This is what is shown on the graphic. You see that it's not perfect, but you see that, for example, the model tell you in some episodes that...
But it's interesting, right? Because it seems to be doing better in, for instance, these perseverative phases as in these exploratory phases. The error profile seems to be sort of not uniform.
Yes, of course, because here you have you have episode onset, which is it's much more complex to predict the quitting exploration by rejecting an hypothetic strategy or confirming it. Mm-hmm. So you have more noise, of course, because you have two possibilities to quit exploration. Here you have only one possibility to quit exploitation, is to go into exploration. But you have only two possibilities to quit exploration, either by confirming your hypothetical actor or to reject it. Mm-hmm. And of course, the model is not perfect.
No, sure, this is the problem.
So there are more noise intrinsically. Mm-hmm. So now what we can do, and I will finish by this, is to look in the brain using fMRI, what happened at this precise event. So it seems that this event correspond to what happened in the human mind, because the behavior tells us something like that. So if there is really some, if more or less this algorithm, if we believe this algorithm is implemented in the brain, then this event should be observable in fMRI, in specific brain region. As I tell you, first we expect that the brain will monitor the absolute reliability of several alternative task sets. And according to what we know, the monitoring of the actor task set, the reliability of the actor task set should be monitored in the ventromedial prefrontal regions. Whereas, and this is what I show you about this branching task, the monitoring of alternative strategies should be monitored in the anterior frontopolar regions. This is what we observe. If we compute region which activation covary with this absolute reliability signal, we observe that in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex we have two regions here, that which activation is correlated with actor absolute reliability. These two regions. Whereas in the lateral prefrontal region, we have the activation and concurrently correlate with the reliability of the best alternative strategy in terms of reliability, the best reliable strategy, alternative strategy, and the second best at the same time in this frontopolar region. So it seems that this region, compute the absolute reliability as predicted by the model. Then we know that the SEC is related to switching away from exploitation and switching to exploration. The SEC is able to detect unpredictable outcome and so on, and respond to all that. So what this model would predict that the SEC should react precisely in switching event when the algorithm creates a probe. So we can check that because the algorithm tells you, okay, in this event, subject should create a probe, and then we should expect some activation in the SEC at this point. And this is what we observe. Here you have SEC, and you see that in this region, here we realign activity on events. So the blue line here is the activity in following a switching event. And you see that in the SEC you have a very strong activation. Whereas in all kind of event, in confirmation event, rejection event, or simply in exploitation trials, or in exploration trial, unrelated to this event, you see that there is no significant activations in the SEC. So the SEC activates specifically when the algorithm predicts that a probe is created, and you switch in exploration. You see that you have similar effect here in the dorsal striatum, response to this switching event. Whereas, for example, here in the VMP-FC, the region I showed you before, you have no at all effect of switching effect. So you have very specific effect in the DSCC and the dorsal striatum. These two regions respond only to switching events. Now, and this is what I show you, we know that the lateral prefrontal cortex is involved in selecting task set. And so here's the model, basically, would predict that this region is able to detect reliable alternative strategies and select it as actor. And this happens especially in rejection event. So in rejection event, there is one monitor strategy which becomes reliable and which is selected to quit exploration. So the prediction here is that this lateral prefrontal region should react specifically on this rejection event and not on switching event and not on a confirmation event. And this is what we observe at least in the lateral prefrontal cortex, in the left lateral prefrontal cortex. That here you have a region that responds specifically to rejection event when the algorithm predicts that there is a rejection of this hypothetical strategy, and not significantly on other event in switching, confirmation, and of course in regular exploitation or exploration trial.
So why only on the left?
It's a good point. I think if you decrease the threshold, you start to have some, the significant threshold, you start to have some, it's probably more left because, I mean, the task is about digits and some verbal stimulus, not all.
Okay.
And then premotor regions and posterior prefrontal region, many studies show this that involved in forming and consolidating task set. And this happens when in switching and confirmation event. So this region should be involved both in switching and confirmation event when you create a task set, the probe, and when you confirm it. So this region, this green region here, posterior prefrontal regions, are basically involved in setting this new strategy and consolidate it when it's confirmed. And this is what we observe bilaterally this time, that you see that such region responds to switching and confirmation events. So what happened in confirmation event? In confirmation event, basically, here there is some effect in this posterior lateral prefrontal region that seems to indicate that the probe actor is consolidated in long-term memory. But what is the signal that allows to consolidate? What is a consolidation? What is a confirmation event? It's simply that the reliability of the probe actor passed from the unreliable to the reliable state. And it seems to be that there is some consolidation. So the idea is that this confirmation event and this reliability signal passing from the unreliable to the reliable state act as an internal reinforcer, reinforcing this strategy in long-term memory. And if it's the case, then we should have at this confirmation, on this confirmation event, we should have activation in regions that usually responds to reinforcer. That is basically basal ganglia and especially ventral striatum region. And we observe this. We observe that this ventral striatum region, that is a region known to respond to reward values, to reinforcers. This region responds in this confirmation trial that are a pure algorithmic construct. We cannot see this in the behavior. This is a pure algorithmic construct. The algorithm tells you that in this trial, subject should have confirmed an hypothetical strategy. And what we observe that in this trial, the ventral striatum in subjects responds very strongly and not really significantly to, or much less significantly in other conditions. That is that, well, it's interesting. It's a very strong response. It's interesting. So as if there are these reliability signals serve as a cognitive reinforcer to consolidate the probe actor in long-term memory as a new reliable strategy that deserves to be stored in long-term memory. And it's interesting to have this response here, this very strong response, because as I show you in the behavior, of course, a confirmation event cannot be seen because the probe is just confirmed. So the behavior just continue with this probe. So there is no, you cannot see in the behavior, of course, a specific point or specific transitions in this confirmation event. This is here. Of course, in confirmation event, you continue with the probe. So the exploratory response just continue to gradually decrease. And for the correct response, the same. So this event doesn't really exist in behavior, but it exists in the brain, at least according to...
When this happens, they do get a feedback because they are performing a task, right? And they give an answer and they get a response.
Yes.
So, but you call this a cognitive reinforcer. That is, you were, at least the way I understood what you said, was that you're saying, well, this is driven by an internal process. So how do you exclude it's not the external feedback that's driving this?
Because this external feedback is received in all kind of events, all kind of trials. In exploitation, especially for example in exploitation, where is it? In exploitation trial. This is the exploitation trial, okay? Mm-hmm. Sorry, the legend is not here. So this is the exploitation trial. In every trial, subject got feedback. Mm-hmm. And in exploitation trial, he got especially positive feedback because he has the right strategy.
Yeah, but wait, it has to do that with the predictability of the reward, right? So if it's a switch-in trial, then it would be an unexpected reward. And then you would expect that the external feedback is processed differently because of the...
Yeah, but this is a confirmation, yeah. It's response to the confirmation.
Yeah, but you see the point, right? So you were saying it was purely driven by an internal consideration, while it might also have to do with your ability to predict what the world is giving you.
Yeah, but what you say is present in every trial. And especially in exploitation trial.
No, I understand. That's what I'm saying. If you go back to the old Wolfram-Schultz data and the reinforced learning behind it, the whole point was that the dopamine, for instance, reward signals are triggered by unpredictable rewards, not by any reward. If you can predict them, so if you're exploiting, so that means if you're exploiting your strategy, you would have predictable rewards, so then they have less impact.
Yeah, of course. But here, this is in addition to all you say. In addition to all you say, the system, to be concrete, we can say that the frontal lobe system has detected that the probe just became reliable, and he used it, and this reliability signal is probably detected. This passage, this transition from unreliable to reliable is detected by these regions. And he used then as a reinforcer, probably consolidating in long-term memory the probe actor. And what this process is in addition to what you say. It's superimposed on this.
Okay.
So I'm going to stop here and just to in a few sentences to try to summarize my long and a bit disorganized talk. But the anterior prefrontal region. So we found evidence that monitors up to 3-4 concurrent strategies and continuously infer their absolute reliability in predicting action outcomes. More specifically, medial prefrontal region monitor action outcome and infer the reliability of the behavioral strategy driving ongoing behavior. This is what I'll show you at the end. The lateral frontopolar cortex concurrently infers the reliability of at most 2 or maybe 3 alternative strategies. According to this model, and we have strong evidence supporting this model, strategy selection is based on reliability and involves dorsolateral prefrontal regions, whereas strategy or learn are adjusted for maximize action utility through reinforcement learning. So what is important is this is a notion of reliability that is used to select strategies. And then the notion of reward, which is used to adjust and learn strategies. And because of this notion of absolute reliability, we have strategy selection is based on a binary rule, which allow to define a notion of hypothesis testing for evaluating the opportunity to create new behavioral strategy from long-term memory, especially in ambiguous and unknown situations. And in this framework, the frontopolar function appear to play a key inferential role for arbitrating between learning, switching, or creating new strategy in a given situation. I'm stopped here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Wonderful. Questions? Armin?
You showed correlation between the activity you find in prefrontal cortex and what you would expect from the model. Do you have any support that the details of the model could actually be implemented in the brain? Meaning, like you would have this long memory, that you have this readout, this weighted sum. Is this computational possible in what we know from brain hardware?
You mean at the neuronal level?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, the summation, this kind of Bayesian process or division inhibition has been proposed and has been. There are some evidence in neuronal experiments, electrophysiological experiment providing some evidence for this kind of. I mean, the computation by the model is very simple. I mean, you mainly have some. Basically, you make some multiplication and divisions, very simple, and that's it. What is specific to this model is this notion of absolute reliability and the algorithm, how you use it to test or not. a more tricky question is, and what we don't really know is how a set, a behavioral strategy, a set, is really represented in a neuronal network. What is the notion of set in a neuronal network? So there are many people working on this issue now at the neuronal level.
Other questions? Giovanni.
Thank you for your talk. And so, well, I see that in this model, the notion of reliability plays a big role. So the last analysis is very intriguing because you can really track the dynamics in many cases. So I wonder if you also are also looking for instance, at error data to see if there is some reliability prediction errors. So similar to this reward prediction.
On neural data, you mean?
Yeah. Well, because in reinforcement learning, this notion of reward prediction error has been exploited.
Yeah, of course.
For many years. But now you also have a notion of reliability prediction error that you could try to track trial by trial and look at the data. Well, it could be that at some point you make an error, but then because the reliability of the models were very low, so you were maybe not expecting so much. Probably.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So, for example, here we assume that this notion of reliability is computed using some Bayesian inference process, but maybe it's not the case in the brain. There is still an approximation. Yeah.
No, but my question is about the fact that, in a sense, because you have a reliability, it's a probability in a sense. Then you can also formulate it as a prediction, and then you have another prediction error that you can track in the brain, possibly.
Yeah, but this is basically what I show you when I show you that, for example, the most anterior prefrontal region tracks the reliability. This is exactly what we do. We try to correlate activation in brain region with this reliability signal. But then, I mean, a trial-by-trial analysis, you cannot do that experimentally because you need to average over a trial at some point because there are some noise. That's why it's very difficult to test all these models because you need to average over trials to reduce the noise and to have some signals. But how you average? If you average, for example, from episode onset, in this example, you see very smooth curve, but this is not what happened. If you don't average through this kind of external signal or events, you should average on the basis of what? So that's why we do this analysis. We use this algorithmic event like confirmation, and we can rely and then average from this event over trial. And this is the most difficult thing. I mean, you need to have some. Your model needs to identify some specific events, whatever model, even not this model, but two specific events, which allow you to rely on your data and to average from this specific event. You see what I mean?
So then, in this case, the whole validation of the model, which is very interesting, but the task itself is rather limited, right? So this raises this question of scaling. Scaling to larger action spaces, larger queue spaces, and also a larger memory space that might fit into this. So how do you see the scaling properties of this model? Have you already looked into that? Because that's where these algorithms can go wrong, right?
So the task is very limited, very simple. But if you increase the complexity, subject cannot perform it very well anymore. If you, for example, if you have a recurrent condition with 4 task sets, subject could not understand that there was 4 recurrent task sets. They were not better with 4. So
maybe that's not the way to think about scaling, right? Like, I mean, you gave a talk here of 90 minutes or something like this, which can be seen as a variation also on this task, because you have different strategies that are part of the talk, they'll add together to a larger picture. There's feedback, there are errors, there are things you try out that succeed, others that fail, etc. So there's a scaling issue, right?
Yeah, but I mean, of course, I mean, strategy could be very long and very, but what I would, it's very, you can have more actions, more stimuli, and, but then you cannot test it anymore in an experiment. This is a problem. I mean, if in this experiment you use, for example, 8 stimuli.
Talk about that, but the point is that you want to understand the brain, right? And brains are capable of performing tasks that are more complex. So you would like to see how the model could also capture these tasks. You could go to maze learning for it if you want, but right? So this is more.
But
I completely accept the methodological argument, but that was.
Yeah, but I disagree with one point that if you ask subjects about this task, they found it extremely difficult. Extremely difficult. Because you never know when you have a negative feedback, whether because your memory was not good, whether you are in a new episode, whether, I mean, and for subject it's extremely difficult, and I found it extremely challenging. It seems simple in terms of representation, of course, because you have only a mapping between digits. But in executive term, it's very complex. And
but then you run the risk that you are presenting a model that will just be a model of this task and not of the brain at large. This is my challenge, right? This is my question.
It's true. It's, I agree. That's why, I mean, we need to, we need to, I mean, to use different experiments with different kind of tasks and so on.
Right.
But you know, this is always the same thing. I mean, that's why, I mean, research is a long process, because if you do a model from a task, then you can say, okay, the model is ad hoc to this task. If you do a model and then you test it in a task, then you say, okay, but the task was designed for this model. So that's why you need always to make different experiments and to test it differently and so on. So, but I think what is important, I would like to emphasize something here, is that you have the detailed computation, and there may be many variations, possible variations. But for me, what is important here is the concept, and not the detailed computation. There are several concepts that appear to be critical. We tested many models, and we can compare the fit of many models with just some distinct conceptual view about, for example, you can just remove the notion of hypothesis testing and task set creation. And you see that you cannot explain the data with that. So there are some basic elements that seems to be, that are quite abstract, but that seems to be general enough to explain, I mean, to be generalized to other tasks. This is the point.
Right, exactly. If there are other questions, Etienne, thank you very much.
Thank you.